Okay, we'll get started then. Note taking. First question is note taking important in economics, and why? What are our aims? What, if we do teach note taking, what are our aims with that? Does anyone have an opinion? Crickets. Always crickets to start with.
Hey guys. So my it's Adam. My camera's not working for some reason.
Don't worry about it. It's fine. We like that.
I'm just instinctively. Obviously, I've not taught econ before, but instinctively, I would say we definitely do need to. Whether I've not actually kind of taught the Cornell method, but I've heard people who have say it's a really good thing to teach. And it's just obviously doing A-level econ is probably going to be essential, a skill for uni to learn how to independently take notes and things.
So kind of one of the reasons to do it is to prepare them for the next step. Is that sort of?
Yeah, I think so. And to prepare them to be independent learners as it is. I mean, especially this year, they're going to need to be skilled up in independence as much as possible, I think.
Absolutely. Has anyone had any success with Cornell method? I've tried it, but unsuccessfully. But that might be because I didn't stick with it. Does anyone find it particularly successful?
Not yet, although I haven't really sort of followed it through. I haven't really done much with it at all. Actually, I just sort of suggested it and left it for the students to do whatever they do with.
Yeah.
I suppose it depends. This question, I think, depends on how you sort of what's it for? What are you delivering? I tend to have a lot of stuff for them to do, so there's not actually a lot of like me talking and therefore them taking notes. Or well, there's plenty of me talking, but the stuff is already there for them to fill in and things. So I've tended to leave it for, well, go away and look at this thing and maybe write some notes about it, and therefore not really followed it up. But it's something I want to address and take on Cornell stuff a bit more.
So I think the point that kind of something you've touched on there is that there's a difference between making notes because of the way we're lecturing in lessons versus making notes on, say, a video, and that kind of independent learning is we might have to do more of or have done. And I imagine actually universities probably will rely more on that as well, versus making notes from a textbook. Yeah, exactly. Versus making notes from a textbook versus making notes from articles. So I think when we talk about note taking, what I think my first thought is often when I think of note taking, I think of sitting in class making notes of what the teacher is saying. But actually, we use note taking in a much broader sense than that. I've perhaps moved away a little bit from note taking in class because of the way you structure lessons. It tends to be they're not writing down what you're saying. They're perhaps writing down answers to questions based on the topic, rather than saying I'm going to talk, you write this down. Does anybody expect students to write notes as they're talking?
I'm thinking to. But again, that's only because probably I might end up trying it and then going back on that. But I'm imagining doing, I don't know, talking for 5 or 10 minutes about a concept and then being able to just jot down some key points. But I'm also trialing kind of moving away from PowerPoints being my main resource to kind of 2-sided pages with some key questions and key notes on anyway. So I'm probably going to print those out and expect them to annotate. I've given them the key notes, but expect them to annotate anything else they need to, maybe.
So giving them something to start with, and then going from there, as opposed to start with a blank piece of paper and I'm going to give you some information. This is what. I think that seems to be quite a common, something that people are more commonly moving towards. Do you use a visualizer for that, or are you planning to?
So I am planning to. I'm probably going to print off the sheets anyway. Basically, obviously, with moving around classrooms and stuff now way more than normal, and needing to kind of have stuff just ready to go straight away, I'm thinking just print off these 2-sided pages. It's got a do now on there, and kind of basically everything I would have put into a PowerPoint on a 2-sided printed bit of paper, and then hopefully I will have a visualizer and can annotate it as I go. But if not, then I can kind of almost just talk through it.
Yeah. Manisha, sorry, did I miss?
Yeah, no, it's totally fine. I think it kind of posed more of a teaching and learning question for me then, that kind of is where my thought process kind of went, of a kind of the type of note taking that we expect them to do depends on how we teach them the lesson. So I think I'm more like Andrew in that, so I use flipped learning a lot more, and because of that I spend a lot more of my lessons getting them to answer exam questions, and kind of practicing exam technique and looking at the application side of it. So I very, very rarely, and I don't know if that's going to change this year, I hope it doesn't, I very rarely kind of stand at the front and expect them to take notes. But interestingly, I've expected them to know how to take notes when they're learning content on their own, which I haven't even thought about until now. So now I'm slightly concerned that I need to then go back and teach them. But at the start of the year, I give them a booklet, which is like 100 pages. And it's basically me having broken down the entire course, and they can kind of, and the different places they can go to find the content stuff they need about that area, if that makes sense. So I think I expected them to understand what that meant in my head and how that should translate to theirs.
But I mean, clearly you must have had some success with it before, otherwise it would have all broken down. So clearly they must be writing something down.
No, wouldn't still be there.
What do you think are the things that are the kind of barriers? What do you think makes it difficult for students to write notes? And the students who make poor notes, is that because they feel they don't need to, or because they won't go back to them, or what are the reasons why note taking fails in students?
I think it's literacy. Sorry.
Really?
Yeah, literacy, that's a good one.
Because they don't understand how to pick out the important parts and then how to then translate that into their own words. So which is why we are pretty strict, except for this year, on fives in English and maths, because the English one specifically, because they need to be able to understand how to take something and put it into their own words, because they're full of such new concepts and ideas that it's really important for them to be able to do that.
So when they can't pick out information, do you think that's a literacy issue, or an understanding the content issue, or like an interaction between
probably a combination?
Yeah, absolutely, a combination of both of them. Because the things that we kind of use in terms of like the application for how we teach it means that we kind of expect them to be able to pick up a newspaper and understand it, or like read a BBC News article and understand what they're talking about. But a lot of them can't access it, which is why we end up having to like break bits down for them. So yeah, both, I guess.
And so how do we get around that?
Throw out questions out there, like you're an easy goal, but... So give me answers, tell me. I'll get them to underline everything they don't understand. And then if they don't understand anything, I will pick out something that I think they might not understand.
That underlining from like an article, or?
Yes. So for example, if I don't give them an entire article, I break down the article, I like take out the important bits first, and then I will give them an article and get them to underline anything they don't understand, even like keywords or even non-economic words that just they don't understand. And they're really bad at it at first, and they get better at it because they know that if there's something I think they might not understand or have got slightly wrong, then they know I'm going to pick on them. So I start off with that. And then we kind of just talk around it about what different people picked out. So I get them to reduce the article to like 10 key terms. They don't have to make sense, or to a sentence of maximum 10 words. And they then talk about what they picked out, what they found important. But the 10 words bit is like absolute maximum.
And so when they're making notes from an article, what do you see the purpose of that being?
Okay, so I tend to, it kind of helps them to understand what they are reading and put it into their own words, so they can then critique and talk about what the problems of whatever's going on is, and then link it to whatever they have learned, are learning, etc.
Do you expect them to go back to you expect them to refer back to the article? So are they making notes because it's something good to practice and because it helps them process the information?
Yes.
Or are they making notes because then they've got something smaller to refer back to later without having to read the whole article, or a combination of the two?
A combination of the two. And then because that will then help to link to the content that they have then learned, had a look over. And it helps to pick out quite early on those that haven't done their homework as well. If they don't understand what's going on and I've given them an article about interest rates and they don't know what interest rates are, right? Yeah.
Andrew?
How would you penalise that? Would you sanction that if they haven't got like enough note-taking?
Go on, say that. Sorry, what was the last? Would I penalise it if they don't have enough note-taking?
If you asked them to do some like pre-learning, to make some notes or something, and then they came to class and they didn't really know the basics, would would you give a sanction for that, or would it be kind of you need to do more this?
No, so I kind of split I split my class in two. So if they are doing a bit of flipped learning, then I get them to also complete a multiple choice test, and it has to be done the night before my lesson. And I can then obviously go online and check who's done it. So I know once they come into my room who's done it and who hasn't done it. But this has literally been 5 years of like my life looking into kind of flips. And I'll know when they come in. So I have 2 different tasks. This isn't every lesson, by the way. It's probably like once you introduce a new topic. So once they come into my classroom, I know who's done it and I know who hasn't done it, which is absolutely fine. And the ones that haven't done it then have the first 10 minutes of my lesson while everyone else is doing something else, which kind of deepens their understanding from their homework. And the ones that haven't done it have 10 minutes to actually do what they were supposed to do. And they kind of get to a point where they don't want to be that person that's doing the other thing at the start of the lesson. So it's quite interesting working around that way, but it worked with A-level and GCSE.
You get them to do the pre-reading and the quiz before the lesson.
They do indeed, but I give them 2 weeks to do a piece of homework, so I have my entire year mapped out. Like it's a bit ridiculous. So if I know that I'm starting a new topic in 2 weeks' time, when they come into my room tomorrow, I'll say to them, you've got 2 weeks. I've set this for you. This is what you're going to do. They get reminders, and then I can then check it.
Andrew?
Does that make sense?
That was all really interesting. I've got a lot of similar things to Manisha going on, but something Manisha said made me think about whether anyone here is doing any of this sort of note-taking stuff like corporately, whether the school itself is pushing any particular ways of doing things. And I mean, he's talking about sort of reducing things. So my new place I've just joined us keeps on talking about various sort of tools with which to think hard about stuff, and some of them would fit into this, the sort of like reducing this article into whatever, and that's coming through at a corporate level from year 7 onwards a bit. So there's some
the kind of learning habits type,
and
metacognition type thing. Manisha?
Andrew, does your school use magenta principles? No, because you said reduce.
Probably not.
It's fine, don't worry. We basically have a set of 8 principles when we're talking about when we're like planning lessons, and not even planning, and reduce is one of them. So there's like 8 principles that we kind of say, like reduce, contrast, compare.
Yeah, it sounds very similar.
And it sounds like
I think there were 12 of them though. Some of them were a bit of a magenta colour on the thing I got shown yesterday. This is a brand new. I've only been here 2 days, so don't know.
Okay, I think you're doing what we do. So a lot of my resources are basically now geared around magenta, and we're doing the complete opposite in terms of note taking. We're focusing on oracy this year, and it's my project for the year. So yeah,
rather than writing.
But no, nothing. Yeah, so there's been a lot of research done around how we need to get them to talk once they come back. But you said thinking hard as well, and that kind of all comes into the oracy stuff that we're focusing on.
Talking is the bridge between thinking and writing. Can't remember who said that. Somebody would have said it. Something I found successful with note taking, but I don't know whether. Okay, something that I found that helps students take better notes, and particularly better revision notes, is to give them a really clear list of questions of what I want them to answer. So what I want their notes to include. But then at what point are they not taking notes anymore, and are they just answering questions? So I do find that that's very, very useful for them to make revision notes, or if I want them to read an article, I want them to get something out of it, being very explicit about what I want them to get out of it. But then I'm taking away part of the process. I'm doing half of it for them. So although the product is better and they've got something better to refer back to, and I think they feel more confident and they're looking through the article and it's more focused, does that take something away from them? And should I perhaps be practicing practicing doing that with students? Should they be coming up with what questions do we want to know? Because the problem is that when they're reading, and it's the same with I'm sure we've all experienced it with academic articles, unless you read it through twice, reading it through once and then working out what it's saying and then reading it through again, actually that process is quite difficult. It's kind of what you were saying, Manisha, about picking out the important bits. Unless you know what you're looking for, that's very difficult. Perhaps However, there is an interim step. Perhaps I could just give them the spec and say, look, this is what you need to know. How is that, can you pick out the bits that are going to map to help you with what you need to know? So I think that's something that I perhaps need to look on a little bit more. Adam?
I was just about to say, what are your students taking notes from? Like, are they taking notes from YouTube videos? Are you setting them textbook reading? I mean, because I want to, basically, all of my students I'm coming into are performing at U grade at the moment. And I'm like, right, I need to do as much flipped as possible. And they're also not, they clearly haven't got the academic skills. So I'm thinking, do I set them like Econ Plus style videos to watch beforehand, or?
I think the problem, Econ Plus style, we're kind of going off topic, but as I don't think he's here, I think his videos are really, really good for revision because they're very retrospective. They put things, that things are already put together and they bring them to the surface. Whereas I'd say for the first time watching videos, I think I really like the marginal revolutions videos. Because they're meant as first time learning, but I think learning from videos is always going to be difficult because it's always going to be difficult to find find the information. I think the textbooks are good as well. I think depending on what it depends on the student, depends on what information I want them to get. But sometimes the textbooks are good. If they've learned something and I just want them to get some writing down, the physics and maths tutor notes can be really useful. If I want them to do something, the core econ textbook is really good for kind of a lot of in-depth first learning. So it really varies. But I think you're right. It depends on whether you're trying to get them to, I think the approach is different, whether you're getting them to make notes to help their learning or make notes to consolidate. I think it depends on whether you're kind of looking forwards or looking backwards with the learning almost, whether you're using it to look backwards or whether you're using it to go forwards.
I suppose this comes to the homework part of the chat as well. In that, like, I don't know if I'm expecting too much, but I'm almost hoping homework is going to be the same every single lesson, and it will be to make notes previously on what we are going to learn, and to then make consolidation flashcard notes after it. Yeah,
I mean, and sometimes the Cornell method can fit in with that, in that it requires you to go back over the notes that you've already made. So you make the big chunk of the lesson and then you add in the cues and add in the summary. And that's one of the benefits of the Cornell method, is that it is active recall, but it is a faff. And actually, I think it highlights that some students really struggle with finding the cues. I wonder in part whether there is an intermediate step if you have got quite if your learners are coming in without massive skills, is almost giving them again a list of questions and they can kind of match up as to so it's not necessarily going in that order, but where is each question, where is the answer to each question in what you've written. I don't know, and I know lots of people told the benefits of Cornell method, and I've tried it myself, but I haven't actually ever met anyone who uses it religiously. It's almost like it's this mystical unicorn that everyone knows they should do, but nobody actually does do. And that makes me think, why don't they do it?
I saw a good blog the other day. I can't remember. I'm trying to dig it out whilst we talk. That was basically using it, within class to sort of they made to do a bit of sort of recall and spacing. So they sort of did the main bulk bit once, and then like the next week they then did the little sort of key takeaways down the left hand side, and then like after that they did the sort of summaries and things, and they sort of kept revisiting them. But that's, again, sounds a bit like that starts to become your entire like lesson. But no, that's.
But I mean, if it's useful,
yeah.
And as Adam said, if you could incorporate that into homework as well, potentially as well, I guess it does make it easy. You can then look back on summaries from previous lessons. I don't know. Are there any techniques that you use that are economics specific that perhaps wouldn't be used in other subjects, so potentially helpful for the teachers in the room that teach more than one subject? Is there anything, or moving from another subject? I certainly use a lot of abbreviations and knowing what the abbreviations are in economics, and lots of arrows as well, and being able to take a bunch of text or an explanation and being able to reduce it into a chain of analysis, because of course even though it might be written in sentence, the way it's written in text, sometimes this happens to the because of this, and you've got to work out what's before and what's after. So I use a lot of arrows, and knowing that if you click the hyphen twice and then the greater than button, that makes an arrow as well. I think I found that helpful. Has anyone got any specific? So George has found success with arrows as well. Any other specific economics tips or techniques that you use to help students kind of decode economic text?
We walk across the room, which is kind of what you do, but physically. So when you kind of do the arrows, we literally put pieces of paper on the floor, and once they give me a chain of analysis, we will walk across the room that have like 4 pieces of paper out. So I have to get to the end, but I can't do that this year. So I don't know what I'm going to do.
That's a really useful visual reminder of the fact that so many students go from one side to the other, and that you say, you need to pave the way. You need to take someone with you. You can't just jump. Anything else? I think does anyone give students a list of specific kind of abbreviations that you use, or do you? Because I just kind of they get used to the fact that I means investment and not inflation, or they kind of absorb that sort of thing. Does anyone teach that specifically, or give students a list? Thanks for the blog. I'll read that. Does anyone do that specifically, or give them a list, or?
Not really, actually, no. Maybe I should do.
I've never thought about it.
Do other teachers use lots of? That isn't just me. Please tell me that's something like use lots and lots of letter abbreviations for.
Like what? What beyond the I?
Like standard ones like Y and P
Yeah.
and pound, and for pound for exchange rate, or and going from there. Okay, good. That's fine.
BC, FC, TC. So I micro. So
all the MPCs.
All the cost of
MPCs.
And like all the cost and revenue abbreviations. So so TR, AR, MR.
Okay, that's all right.
I just assume that once I've taught it to them, they'll just remember it. But I think they do.
Get the gist.